We ready? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Hello, welcome to Science on Tap Minocqua. Thank you all for coming. We know there is a Packer game, but they'll probably barely have started by the time we're done here tonight. So thank you all for coming. My name is Susan Knight. Science on Tap is an example of the Wisconsin idea, an idea conceived in 1905 that the borders of the university are the borders of the state. And our partners in Science on Tap include the Minocqua Public Library, WXPR, the Lakeland chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Trout Lake Station, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, and our hosts right here, Rocky Reef Brewery. Thanks to all of them. And we are supported by a grant from the Brittingham Fund to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you all know by now 3 ways to watch. You can come right as you are tonight and watch us live is great. You can also watch us from home. And it seems like our sound okay? Okay, sorry. You can watch from home or from a computer, wherever you are. And all you have to do is go to our website and just say watch live. And you can also watch any event later. So we archive all of our events, and so you can watch anything another later on if you missed one. Our next event is January 2nd, after the first of the year, and we will have Tom Robick. He's a professor at University of Minnesota, Duluth, and he's going to talk about fish in Lake Superior. We've heard him speak many times. He's a fabulous speaker, got some really interesting stories about Lake Superior. But tonight we have Katie Thoresen, known to most of us as the voice of the news of WXPR, our fabulous local public radio station, WXPR. And as most of you know, WXPR is a local public radio station that's been broadcasting music and news here in the Northwoods since 1983. It is not affiliated with Wisconsin Public Radio and does not get any funds from the state of Wisconsin. Instead, it receives much of its operating funds from donations from all of us. The station has a few paid employees, such as Katie, but through most of the day, if you're listening, you will hear volunteers hosting programming, like our own Molly Rose, who's right here. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mike's back there too.
Oh, and Mike, right. Sorry, didn't miss Mike. Katie grew up in the suburbs outside Chicago. She attended Central Michigan University, where she studied photojournalism and anthropology. And after graduating from college, she worked as an intern with the National Park Service at Kenai Fjords National Park in Seward, Alaska. Before joining Public Radio World, she worked in local TV news at Newswatch 12 in Rhinelander and also at another station in Oregon. Katie joined WXPR as news director in 2020. She loves to hike and paddle around on her kayak during the summer and the fall. And come winter, you'll find her snowshoeing all around the area. Okay, here's your trivia question for Katie Thoresen. As I said, Katie had an internship with the National Park Service at Kenai Fjords National Park in Seward, Alaska. It was her job to capture photographs and videos the park could use for promotional and educational purposes. One of her first weeks on the job, she was sent out with park employees to a remote part of the park to photograph Ayalik Glacier near a bay of the Pacific Ocean. While they were standing on the shore, something rather frightening happened. What was it? A walrus popped up out of the water and started moving toward them. B, a huge chunk of a glacier calved into the water and threatened to create a local tsunami. Or C, a huge wolf came out of the woods and started circling the group. All right, so we have walrus, glacier, and wolf. What do you think? The answer was the glacier, calved off. Here's Katie to tell you more about that story.
Hello. Thank you all for having me out here. A glacier did break off. It was about half a mile wide, broke off into the ocean and sent a wave full of ice chunks towards us. I, of course, had my photography equipment all over the shore, so I was scrambling to get it all in there. Everyone was fine. We made it to a safer place. It was all good. And now I only take out equipment as I use it. So that was my lesson from that trip there. But I'm very excited to be here and talk about WXPR. I do recognize quite a few faces out there, but has anyone, I don't want to call people out, has anyone never heard of WXPR before? You right there. I'm just kidding. That's okay. So Susan did a good job of kind of explaining who we are. We are a public radio station. We're based out of Rhinelander, and we cover news pretty much like Lincoln, Langlade County, north to the UP and a little bit into the UP. WXPR was started primarily by a man named Peter Norgren. He had been involved with another public radio station in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, another rural northern place in the upper Midwest here. And he came over here and he was like, yes, this area needs a public radio station. So they incorporated in 1979, had their first broadcast in 1983. Eventually, a couple of years later, expanded it down to Wausau and into Ironwood to where we cover today. As Susan mentioned, we are not part of Wisconsin Public Radio. That is a common misconception here. We're our own thing. We are an NPR affiliate, so that means we pay NPR so that we can air Morning Edition and All Things Considered and some other news and talk programs and things like that. And we get a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to help pay for that. But as Susan said, most of our funding comes from just members and from business supports, and that's really kind of the foundation of what WXPR is. We're a community radio station, and that also kind of informs our news coverage a lot. We send surveys out every year asking our listeners, hey, what is important to you? What topics are important to you? And every year without fail, environment is at the top of that list. We want to hear stories about the environment in the Northwoods. Usually health and the economy kind of duke it out for the second place. And then coverage of our tribal communities in the Northwoods usually rounds out the top four. And so that's really kind of the main focus that we see in our stories. We look at that and say, okay, this is what people want to hear in the Northwoods, so this is what we're going to do then. That's not saying that that's all the news that we cover of those topics, but that's a lot of our focus is those ones, and that's kind of what informs that news. So how do we find those stories, though? The news comes from a lot of different places. Most often, it is people emailing me or calling me or stopping me at the grocery store saying, hey, did you hear this was happening? Hey, did you know that this is going in here? My coworker, John Burton, who does the morning show, his line is the Little Old Lady Network is one of his favorite places to get the news. They know everything, And so it's really making those connections. Like I said, we are a community radio station, so it's making those connections that really drives a lot of our news coverage. People sending us ideas. Some of it comes from things that are playing out at the national level, and we're taking a look at how it can impact the Northwoods and how we kind of localize it there. And sometimes it's looking at what our other local news stations are doing. I think we are pretty fortunate in the Northwoods to have still a lot of local news, even if it's not necessarily daily news anymore. We have 3 TV stations. Most counties still have a newspaper. We have some of the radio stations are still doing news. So it's definitely declined in recent years, but one of the places I look to is I see what they're doing, and then I find a way to say, hey, is there some way I can add to this narrative? Is there another perspective I can give people that they're not already getting from this other news place? Another way that I really get stories is just from what I love. I love the Northwoods. I have been coming up here my whole life. Like Susan mentioned in my intro, I worked at Channel 12 previously for several years, moved out to Oregon for a little bit, and came back for this job. But when you have people doing the news up here that genuinely love it up here, I think the stories just kind of come naturally because, we're out there and seeing what's going on and seeing what matters to people. My personal favorite stories to do are ones on the environment. Specifically, I really love when I get to tag along with researchers in the Northwoods and see what they're doing and how the work they're doing can shape other places as well. I think that also goes back to just my kind of first real-world job after college, working for the National Park Service. I worked at Kenai Fjords, I worked at Denali National Park, and that was kind of the job, was talking to researchers and interviewing them and sharing and kind of maybe simplifying sometimes their little science talks, because sometimes it's not so conversational or so easy to digest. So that was part of my job, was bringing that and making that easy for people to understand all the great work that was being done there. And I think that carries over into a lot of what I enjoy doing here. I also just enjoy the outdoors. So I will do any story that takes me outside, gets me out of the office, gets me in there. I know a lot of people think, oh, the news is a lot of doom and gloom, which it can be. Personally, my favorite stories are always the positive ones. We have a series called We Live Up Here, which is, it's really just focused on the people in the Northwoods that are kind of maybe unique or doing things that are unique, or organizations that really just embody what it is to be in the Northwoods, to be someone that embodies everything about that Midwest spirit and the upper Midwest spirit. So I love stories that do for there. I've got one tomorrow that I'm excited about an artist that she just handmade 551 Christmas cards and is giving them out to people at nursing homes. That's just people that take that time and do that. Those are really my favorite ones to do. I also really love to do stories with our tribal nations. I kind of, being in this job, recognize that there hasn't always been the greatest relationship between the media and tribes, going back decades, bad portrayals, inaccurate portrayals. And so sometimes that trust is hard to build. So anytime that I do get invited in to do stories, I do recognize that and really want to honor that. And very fortunate, I think we're very fortunate to have so many tribes in this area that are willing to open up and share about their heritage and their culture and different things going on. And so I'm always really excited to do those stories. And I share that because my favorite stories, because I like to do my favorite stories when I can. And so it's for me, it's always finding a balance of stories that I want to do, that I know people will enjoy and have fun with, versus stories that need to be told. Covering county board meetings and city council meetings is not my favorite thing to do, but it's important because obviously a lot of decisions are made there. And I think that's honestly where a lot of value comes in for newspapers. And I give every credit to newspaper reporters. They sit in every single meeting and are paying attention. With such a large coverage area for WXPR, it would be impossible for me to sit in every county board, every city council meeting that's going on up here. So that goes back to what I said at the beginning of depending on what other local stations are doing, news organizations are doing, and also just people paying attention. People go out to these meetings too and keep tabs on things and let us know. And so that goes back to it as well. And then kind of one of our more recent focus is I spent 8 months this summer going through something called the Solutions Journalism Rural Cohort. What solutions journalism is it's kind of a way of a lens, I guess you would say, for stories of how you make news that's focused on problems, but not like just dragging people down that, oh my God, that's another problem. Oh my gosh, we don't have housing here. We don't have a workforce here. Climate change is ruining everything. Instead of just sharing all the problems in the Northwoods, it's looking at, people that are working towards solutions. Maybe it's, they saw something work in another community, another state, and they're trying it here, and so what can we learn from them? Or maybe they're trying something new and just trying it out. But it's just kind of a different lens that they find, like that people find just, they can stay engaged with the news a little bit longer just because it's not quite so depressing. So just briefly going through like the process of it. So that's kind of how I generate story ideas, how ideas come. So when I have an idea, then it goes to interviews. I'm thinking through, going through who I have to interview, who's important. It's either phone interviews, sometimes it's in person. Then once I have all the interviews, I come back to the station and I write a lot, which sometimes people don't really realize with radio is that most of my job is actually not what you hear on air, it's writing what you hear on air. So I write it up for both on air and for our website at WXPR.org. I edit the audio. We're a one-man band here, so I am doing the whole process of writing, editing the audio, printing out scripts, because we still print out scripts, and then we get on the radio during Morning Edition and All Things Considered, and send it out to the world. We put it on our website. We have it on our app. We have it on social media. We have it in a daily news email that goes out every morning. So we're putting all of this out as many ways as we can, editing photos, and then just sharing it with people so that hopefully it reaches people that care about it, people share it with them, and that's how you get the news out. That's where it goes. And so I will say, one thing I really appreciate about having worked in radio versus TV with my personal experience is that I really appreciate that I can take time with a story. I'm not just churning it out one after another, got to fill that A block, got to get it going. I can really take time. I can do longer pieces and really let the story breathe. And I think really an important thing with that is, too, that, just because I do a story one time doesn't mean that's it. I think that's really the biggest value of local news, is that there is rarely a topic that I have just done one single story on and never touched it again. I'm constantly going back, getting updates on it, checking in, if it was a project, seeing if it was successful, if they had a referendum, what did they do with that money? And I really think that's something that you just don't get with state and national news organizations because they have a bigger area to cover. They're in and out and on their way. So it's one of the things I appreciate about doing with local news, and I hope people also appreciate with local news, is that we can keep up to date on it. I don't know if that was too short for you there. Open up for questions.
It was great. Thank you, Katie. And now Amber will walk around and take questions. So just raise your hand.
Questions? You can ask me anything.
I have a question. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
So my question is, you and John are pretty much the two news people, right?
That's our news department, yeah.
So when you walk in at the beginning of the week, how many stories are you working on that are going to be you're kind of taking them as they come in versus stories that you're working on for 2 or 3 weeks out?
So my goal is to have a story that I have written and produced every single day. So whether that's a 2-minute story that's a bit shorter, what we would maybe call a day turn story. I would probably have so I keep an Excel spreadsheet going in my computer of, okay, I have put out calls. Right now I probably have 8 calls out on 8 different stories of, hey, waiting because no one's going to get back to me right away. Sometimes nobody gets back to me for stories, and that one just never happens. And so going in on Monday, I probably already have store interviews for 2 stories that I know for sure are going to turn that week. I'm working on at least one other kind of long-term story that I've been, that maybe takes a couple weeks to do. And then I'm also like focused on, okay, I need to have 3 more stories this week. So this is what I'm looking at right now. And then obviously with news too, things just pop up. So I would say my day, schedules are kind of out the window sometimes. But yeah, that's kind of how I focus on it. So I'm like I said, I probably have at any given time like 8 stories that I'm actively working on. To get that, if that answers your question.
I don't know if I need the mic, but Katie, I'm wondering, at minimum, you have a story, you have this sort of lot of things that you want to pull from. What do you need at the base, at your minimum, to create a story? Or are you decided, like, this is going to be a story, I don't know if it's going to be 2 minutes or if this is going to be an hour-long piece?
Yeah.
What do you need at minimum?
That's a good question. So at minimum, I would say I need at least one source for a story. So, sometimes I'm just doing a story about, hey, ski trails are opening, they got enough snow for that. That's enough for me to get a local groomer saying, hey, this is what it's looking like right now. I can get a story out. And that, I know if I'm just doing that, it's just going to be a pretty short 1.5, 2 minute story. The ones that are more involved, like I've covered a lot of stories about the wolf populations and kind of the back and forth over that. And so for things like that, we really want to try to make sure that you're hearing as many perspectives as possible. So, it's hearing from a group that wants to have wolves delisted, and this is why farmers that have been impacted by this. It's, tribal members saying, hey, this is a sacred being to me, please, I don't want these hunted. It's people saying, well, we need to delist them so that it's, important for ecological values and stuff. So there's just so many different things. So if I'm having all that and putting it into one story, then that's, I know, going to be a longer piece. At the same time, though, I can also break that down and say, okay, today we're going to hear from this, but tomorrow I'm going to get you this side of the story, or here, or next week you're going to hear from this person. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying, too, of, we don't not just one and done. But yeah, so I would say minimum of one source for just the most basic of the story. And then as you start to get like 2 or 3 interviews, they tend to be longer pieces. And I prefer it when the longer ones, we call it nat sounds or natural sounds. It's where you're hearing, the scrape of an ice skate going down the path. You hear the saw at a mill. Like when you have those sounds that you can incorporate into those longer pieces and kind of draw people in and keep them engaged a bit longer, I think that also lends itself to longer stories. It's much more interesting, much more captivating if you can do that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate WXPR and what they do to bridge our communities and highlight just really important things that matter. My question is, as just a community member, is there a protocol? Let's say, I know you have the old lady protocol, but is there a protocol or a way to go about to be like, oh my gosh, we need to have this conversation as a community. We need to touch on this. What do you recommend as just a community member that witnesses and would like to learn more about it and have other people have a voice in it?
So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I think most of my stories come from people that just, look up WXPR's number online and give me a call and just say, hey, this is what is happening in my community. I'm I have people that call me and say, hey, I'm really concerned about this, happening, and can we report on this? And I'll be honest, as we're saying, it's our news team is me and John Burton, who works part-time. And as I said, we have a fairly large listening area. And so one of the downsides of that is that I as much as it hurts me to say this, I can't get to all stories at all times. But one of the things, too, is I think when people hear what's going on the radio, like, oh, that's all the news that's happening. It's not, like I said, I'm working on multiple stories, so you hear things going on. And so for more complicated pieces, they take time. But yeah, I mean, people just have to reach out and say, hey, this is something that's really important to me. And I think that's also where the important stories are. People that say, hey, this is impacting me. I mean, I think of, in Lac du Flambeau and the issues with the roads. I didn't know about that until one of the homeowners called and said, hey, they're putting up barricades on my road right now, and I don't have a lot of information. And so that's what spurred that, and talking with those people and the tribe and the town and going that and continuing to cover that. Same thing, I think with the PFAS situation in the town of Stella. I had gotten a phone call, and it wasn't even like on my radar that the DNR was holding a meeting in there, because it was just kind of on a back email that no one was really paying attention to, and someone called and said, hey, I really think you should be at this meeting tonight. And so I think that's a good place to start, is just giving a call and saying, hey, this is important to me, saying why, and we can do our best. I think one of the nice parts, too, about our news ecosystem up here is, I have a lot of relationships with our other news things. So maybe it's something that I don't have the capacity to get to right now, but I can call, we have partnered with WAOW television, call them. I'm still good friends with a lot of people at Channel 12. I can give them a call, or with the newspapers too. So yeah, I think it just takes kind of that first phone call and reaching out.
So my question is somewhat related. When you get a tip for a story, or you have someone speak to you about what they would like to hear you tell about, how do you decide exactly who to contact to interview in terms of like experts, or do you interview the people that give you the stories? And then the other, another question occurred to me just while you were speaking. I was like, wow, this sounds like a 24/7 job. So how do you disconnect too?
Yeah, it is. It does feel like a 24/7 job. I'll answer that one first, but it's, I do, personally, I kind of have to, turn off the news on the weekends, which is not an easy thing for me to say, but that's just kind of what I have to do, because, my day literally starts every morning with checking every single local news site, checking Journal Sentinel, checking Wisconsin Public Radio, checking CNN and NPR, and, kind of the big, ones, just to make sure that I do know what's going on there. So sometimes I just chuck my phone out the window. It's really what I would want to do. And sorry, can you repeat your first question? I apologize.
Sure. Yeah. Just how do you decide who to speak to about, or who to interview? Yeah.
So it varies a lot. So I love it when I can talk to what we would call real people. People that aren't necessarily the experts on a topic, but are impacted by something. So, hear from them, cause I think that's where you get the emotional connection as a story, is when you can hear from someone that's similar to you or like you, or that you can relate to on how this is impacting them. But obviously, I still think it's important to hear from experts on topics. So usually what I would do is, I'll use the PFAS situation in Stella. So that would be, talking to a homeowner that's been impacted. I remember talking to the woman who was that initial well that tested at ridiculously high levels, to the point where I called her back the next day and was like, did you mean 100, not 1,000? No, she meant 1,000. It was ridiculous. And just hearing her being about the unknowns and everything with that. And then from there it was, okay, so the next logical step to me is, you talk to the DNR because they're heavily involved in this process already. You talk to health officials because they're already on it. But then it's other things too, Crandon has a water testing. There's a service there that does this and has been really involved in a lot of the testing. So they're kind of a next logical choice. But a lot of it too is just asking people, when I finish interviewing them, who else should I talk to? Who have you been talking to about this? Who should I talk to about this? Because the people who are involved with it are going to know much more. Sometimes When it's a topic I'm not as familiar with, I'll just get on Google and start looking up other news stories about it and see who they've talked to and see if there's someone of the same vein that I could talk to about this. So that's kind of how that goes. And depending on the topic, I kind of go back to like the wolves one, you want to make sure that you're trying to get as many perspectives as you can so that you kind of balance out that story and are sharing what's going on. So you kind of look at it from that way too. Sometimes I'm like, who's the opposite of this, kind of thing. And there's just something, to be honest, there's sometimes I don't know. I miss, a perspective. I miss an idea. And so then I go back and do another story on it because like, hey, we talked to you about this last week. Well, here's what this person has to say about it and offers some new insight on it.
I've got an online question. What are the station numbers of WXPR that folks can tune into to listen, and are there other ways to listen, like live streaming?
There are so many great ways to listen. I'm going to look up to make sure I get it. So we're at 91.7 for most of our area, 100.9 if you're in Ironwood, 91.9 if you're in Wausau. But I will say we don't broadcast. We have an interesting relationship with Wisconsin Public Radio for Wausau. So WXPR broadcasts in Wausau, Marathon County a bit after 6 o'clock. So it's when All Things Considered ends for us and our Northwoods Cafe starts. We're operating in Wausau. And then at 4 a.m. when the news turns back on, we're not in Wausau. So our news does not, and we're on weekends, we're in Wausau. And then the rest of the time it is Wisconsin Public Radio. So we share a tower there. That's why that's like that. So, and then you can also stream us online at WXPR.org, on the WXPR app. On your smart speaker, just ask Alexa to play WXPR. That's it. I think I got them all. Yeah.
So you've just explained a few of the things, a few of the programming that you have during a day, but give us a typical day of the various programs that are filled in, and then how much time do you have to do stories? And then my final question is, you must have some times of like, shoot, I'm missing 2 minutes. What do you do when you have that?
I cry. No, it's only sometimes. Yeah. No. So for our news shows, so Morning Edition, I'll use Morning Edition as our example here. NPR, we're broadcasting that over the air, and every hour follows the same format. So from the start of the hour till 1 minute past, they're kind of doing their, hey, this is what you're going to hear this hour on Morning Edition. Then from 1 minute past to like 8:06 on the dot, it is like just their quick news. Hey, these are the headlines happening. This is what's going on, kind of a little check-in. And we cut in for half of that. So like during All Things Considered, because that's the one I host, it is from 4:04 to 4:06 and 30 seconds. We have 2.5 minutes to give you the news right there. And then at that 4:06:30, NPR takes over and they're talking about, doing their in-depth ones. They do those until 4:18. Then from 4:18 to 4:20, I have 2 minutes that I can fill with things. Then it goes back to NPR. Like it is down to the second that these are timed out. So we do our news we do like in Morning Edition, it's like a 3.5 minute one at the top of the hour. And we do another like 2.5, 3 minute one at the half hour. And then on days where we do have kind of those longer form stories, we actually boot one of the NPR stories and say, hey, you're going to hear from us instead. And we just cut in and have 6 minutes as our longest block, we call them, that we could do a story in. To seriously answer your question about days that we're short on news or just don't, an interview fell through and it's just, not going to happen. We rely heavily on our news partners. There's different places that we can pull from. Like I said, WAOW. We partner with the Star Journal, Tomahawk Leader, pulling those. Wisconsin Eye. is a great place when we need sound bites because they're interviewing two people a lot on different things. And then in really rough days, we also have the Associated Press we pull news from. We have other public radio stations we pull from. We're also partnered with Harvest Public Media, which is like a bunch of Midwest newsrooms that really focus on like rural and agriculture stories that we can do. And some days you just hear the extended forecast for a little bit longer. I will say, if there's a day you're listening and it's like I am like giving you the weather like 5 days out and it's sunny and 60 for 5 days, you're like, oh, she does not have enough news. That's what that is. So, and it's hard sometimes too, and sometimes it'll say some of that too is sometimes it's just hard to fit your news into those time slots. We're so like rigid with that. So we just like, it's either we have to go overtime, which we can't do, or we're short 30 seconds because that's the story that could fit in that time slot. So that's where you're at with that. So you just kind of fill what you got to fill sometimes. Over there. Sorry. Hi.
So I'm wondering, from a technical perspective,
Yeah.
how you get your stories edited on the air. Do you have an engineer? Do you have a producer? Like, are you truly a one-woman show?
I am truly a one-woman show. No, so I genuinely, I am out there either doing like a phone interview, we can record into the computer, or I have like a handheld recorder, I'm out there getting the interviews. I come back, I put that audio into the computer, I listen back to it, pull out sound bites. We use Adobe Audition to cut up the sound bites. For ones that, like if you hear me on Morning Edition, that's pre-recorded, right? Like I'm recording it the night before, splicing it up with the sound bites, exporting it as a WAV file, and then we put it into a computer we call Enco. And it's a computer that has a bunch of different, it's like a library of audio clips, basically, if you want to think of it that way. So sometimes we call them promos, those little 30-second ones you hear like, tune in Sunday for This American Life, those kinds of things. And then I'll also put my story in there. I'll put sound bites from the ones that like John reads. And then it's on a touch screen in the main studio. And so when John or I am sitting there, he pulls up his microphone, says a couple lines, and then he just clicks that, and then the audio comes through there and out. Then we keep talking and keep going. So we do have an engineer. He is very great at his job, and I would genuinely cry without him. That is not a lie. He does great work at getting, because we do have like a lot of things that are automated. We don't have hosts all the time. There's not going to be anyone at the station at 1 a.m. Tonight or tomorrow morning. So we're doing things like that. And so he does that kind of automation to make sure that there is always something playing at WXPR. Hi.
I don't know if you've said this or not, but
Yeah.
how would you prefer that we contact you if we have a potential story for you?
Yeah.
I mean, telephone, email?
I do prefer telephone. I will say I get so many emails per day of just random things coming in, press releases, some company pitching me their product that they want me to do a story on. So my email does get a little overwhelming. But if you give me a call, even if it goes to voicemail, I will get that. And that's my preferred way.
What's the number?
715-362-6000.
Broadly speaking, public radio and public television can be criticized as being liberally biased.
Yeah.
So what do you say to those voices who say, I don't listen to you because you're liberal?
It does happen,
Yeah.
for sure. That's hard. I say to them, like, I get where they're coming from. I do. I always encourage people that if you're just getting your news from one source, that's bad. Like, I don't care if you're getting it from WXPR or NPR, but get it from more than one place. I just think that's what I say to them. Like, I really do just. even if you disagree with what you're hearing, I think there's value in what you're hearing or reading, and things like that. I will say I do often get well, I like your local news, but that NPR, that's a pretty common thing for us, which is honestly one of the reasons why we have things like the Up North Updates email. That's an email that goes out every day at 9 a.m., and it's just like our local and state headlines. So it's not NPR stories, it's just stories that I've put together, maybe some Associated Press ones, and that together there. I genuinely do think, though, that NPR, like WXPR, strives to be balanced, to try and get different perspectives. I do think one of the hard things about NPR is that you have to listen for a while to get those perspectives, right? They do longer form stories, they do interviews. So sometimes you're hearing, if it's like something that's going through Congress, maybe in the 7 a.m. hour you're hearing from a Republican lawmaker, and then the 8 a.m. hour you're hearing from a liberal lawmaker. Well, if you're not, hello. If you're not tuned in for 2 hours, then yeah, of course you're going to think that they're only covering one side of it. So I think that's a challenge. But like I said, I really generally just encourage people, if it's a specific topic that they're like, a specific story maybe that they're upset about, I try and talk to them about, why they think that it's biased or what they think is missing from it, and just encourage people to try and expand their news sources.
I've got another online question here. You are doing a great job with your reporting.
Thank you.
It seems like there are more topics from Michigan in recent years. Has there been a newer partnership with an affiliate of Michigan Public Radio?
Not Michigan Public Radio. We do have like a Michigan source for stories, News Connection, that we pull stories from. We do also partner with 2 public radio stations, Interlochen Public Radio and WCMU for stories. And again, that kind of goes back to, I need a story for today, and so they're a great resource for that. I will say we do try when it's Michigan stories, just because it is such a little part of our listening area. We do try to find ones that maybe more people can relate to, not so geographically. We don't want to do things like what's happening in Detroit. But if there's something that's happening in the Michigan legislature that's impacting parts of the UP, especially if people are, recreating in the UP, because I know a lot of people up here do, that's kind of where that comes from.
We all listen to you all day, but the part that I like the best is your daily email. And I just would hope, or I'd ask that you would say to the other people in the room that do not know about that, how do you get that daily email? And thank you for your work.
Thank you. So he has to say that he volunteers there. The Daily News email was something that I really wanted to bring here. My old TV station would do that for theirs, and I just think it's a really great way. I know my own personal news consumption habits. I am not listening to an hour of Morning Edition every morning. That's just not part of my day and how I function. So I really love it. It's an email, like I said, that goes out at 9 a.m. It usually has between anywhere 3 to 6 stories maybe, it's what I really like about it is it's very minimal work for me. I just have to, in our website, I just tag our local stories with a little tag. That email pulls stories that were published since the last one went out, the last email went out, and it pulls them into that newsletter and sends them out. And I have generally heard from a lot of people that it's just a nice way, even if they're just reading the headlines, it's just a nice way to say, okay, I'm up to date. What's happening with the Northwoods? Got it. And they can move on. So there is a sign-up sheet for it if you would like to. It's over there by the door to sign up for it. It goes out Monday through Friday. And that just goes back to, radio's changed a lot. When WXPR first went on the air in 1983, it was just over the air. And then, the internet came along, and so things were going digital, and we started, I don't even know when we started streaming. But adding smart speakers and the app, I think it's just part of the way that we're just trying to meet people where they're at and get them the news, however they can get it.
I'll follow that up with another online question about volunteers. You have a lot of volunteers. How do you keep them engaged? How do you manage that? And are you looking for more volunteers?
WXPR is always looking for volunteers. Also, there's another question I think back there. But so yeah, we are always looking for volunteers. So obviously, I'm the news director, so I really focus on news. We do have some people that volunteers with the news. Carrie Bladorn volunteers his time and does a Northwoods Moment in History. Gary Entz had started that and had done that for years, which I really love that segment. Susan and folks over at the UW Trout and UW Chem Station do field notes once a month for us. And so people do contribute in that way, which we're always open to. But yeah, most of our volunteers at the station do our music programming. So we have a show for just about any genre you can think of. I mean, polka is a big one. We have our polka show. We have bluegrass. There you go. We have classical. We have rock and roll, jazz. I mean, just the whole bandwidth. And those are all done by volunteers. There are people that, just wanted to get involved. They don't have, most of them do not have any radio experience, any kind of broadcast experience. We train people how to do that. From my conversations with volunteers, they enjoy it. They love, talking to people, bringing music, putting together the shows. Everyone kind of has their own style of doing it. Some just show up and start picking CDs out of our catalog and throw them on the air. Some people have a very curated show down to the minute. They know how their show is going to go. So I think they really just get a lot of joy out of that. And it's just nice to be part of the community. We also do, WXPR as a whole is involved in events, live music, different kind of things like that. And I would say too, we're always trying to find new ways to engage with the community. We've held panels before. We've, done different things. We've gone to different events, partnered with different organizations. So if there's something that you think that WXPR can be part of or that you could use, I mean, the worst we're going to say is no. But we generally do want to be involved in our communities. So I would just say, reach out, pick up that phone for news, for anything. We really do try to get out there where we can.
I've recently heard a poll about basically legacy media being at a whole-time historic low for public trust, and kind of like fell on what you listed as like your sources for news. Just wondering if you think that's true, if that's an exaggeration by anybody, or if there's other ways to like source out beyond those kind of corporate media sources that you're mentioning more than just local, or I don't know how you like paint a picture around there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm also very aware of those surveys and polls that public trust has dropped a lot in news. I will say I do think it is better for local news. Like when you look at a lot of those, they break it up between national news and local news. And a lot of people do really appreciate their local news, which I of course love. I appreciate that. I mean, I do think it gets hard at the national level, and I can't speak to that. I've never been in, there are people that call me and ask me to make changes at NPR. I have no say in that. I don't even have a number. I do not have Ari Shapiro's number. I don't. So I can't. I really am limited to that. But I think it's been hard because there's lines where people say they're news and they're not news, and so that's really hard for people. And I think that goes again to what I was saying, that I think part of it is when you get pigeonholed into one news source, that hurts a lot. So I encourage people to look at multiple news sources. At the local level, I think there is a lot of trust in WXPR, but I'm also very aware of how fragile that trust is. I mean, it would just take me messing up on one story to have that all crumbling down, you know, to get a fact wrong, get a name wrong, something like that, and that's how it goes away. So I'm very cognizant of that, of trying to maintain the trust that I know WXPR already has in the community. And then I also think things like, I was talking about the solutions journalism cohort that I went through. Part of that is regaining trust in news, because so it looks at it through kind of a lens, and it's asking for a story that you're focused on for a solution to tell people what the response is, give them evidence of how you know that response is working, show the limitations of that response, you know, what are the challenges with it, and then share insight from people that are putting through the solution. And they found that when you put stories through these lens and ask people these questions about that to get into, they call them their pillars, that the stories are just, they're more well-rounded, people are engaged in them longer, and I've seen it. The stories that we do with those, I look at our digital analytics, and people are just spending more, they're not necessarily longer stories, but people are taking more time with them, whether they know it's a solution story or not that they're looking at. And so I think it's small efforts like that and just taking time, making sure at the local level that we're doing it right and taking times with stories and working on that to keep that trust is really where I'm focused at.
I love the solution story idea, and I think that if we had more conversations in general where we were projecting and putting our minds together, I think there are a lot better outcomes would be. That being said, could you share maybe a story that you have seen solutions through and movement by just you covering them?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So I'm trying to think. It's still newer, so I will say, like, we haven't done a whole lot of them yet. I mean, I can tell you one that I am working on right now is that in Conover, so pretty much anywhere, not just in the Northwoods, it's a struggle to get firefighters and particularly volunteer fire departments, getting people through there. And so, like, if you look at the demographics of the volunteers, they tend to be older men that are in these volunteer fire departments. So Conover Fire Department and Nicolay College and Northland Pines all kind of are working together to get students who are currently at Northland Pines that have an interest in firefighting. They can take Nicolay College classes at Northland Pines. They go through that. They do some of the, like, they had to do, like, going into a burning building. They did that at Nicolay. And some of those other stuff. And then they also go to the Conover Fire Department and get experience there. And, they're getting firefighters. They're getting these young firefighters that are really passionate about this and are really excited to be here. So it's kind of in that frame that, like, you're showing people, hey, this is what someone's doing. This is where they found success with. Can it be done elsewhere too? I'm thinking of ones from, like, another station that I saw a story out of was a brewery. What were they trying to do? They were, like, trying to, like, figure out how they could better preserve water and water consumption and things like that. And they were finding unique ways to do that. Well, then after that story aired, another brewery and another place started doing it too. But there was challenges. Not every solution can be done in every place, right? There's different nuances to that. So it's not always easy. I think some of the stories about wild rice have lent themselves to that. This summer I did a story with the Lac Vieux Desert tribe. They're replacing culverts on Lac Vieux Desert Lake in hopes that it will bring down the water levels and be more conducive to growing wild rice. And so I would say before doing that story, I would have done, great, they're replacing a culvert, this is why they're doing it, they're hoping for the best kind of thing. But after doing that, it was a simple other step of, I know that the Secaucus and Chippewa community had done something similar. They had removed culverts in recent years, and they've seen their water level go down. So just by adding that extra piece into that other story, you're now looking at this story with, oh, it's not just an idea that might work. Oh, it's actually worked in other places. Again, that's not guaranteeing that's going to work there, but at least you're getting that sense of, oh, that's actually kind of hopeful that this will come back and things like that. And I think that's an important aspect to, one, I think keep people engaged in news, but also just to make them hopeful about things happening and change in their community and things like that too. So that's like definitely like a goal of mine in 2025 is to push more of those stories out.
I've got an online comment here for you. Thanks for carrying national Native news.
I love that program too. And I think those ones are cool too because that's also a great avenue for us to share stories. Like we share stories from tribes up here through National Native News as well. So people, in Montana and Alaska get to hear about what's happening up here, which I think is always fun. Anybody else? Are we watching the time? When did the Packers start? Oh, they're there. They've already started. So sorry, folks.
Okay, well, thanks so much to Katie. That was great. Okay, thanks again. Thanks again to Rocky Reef and to our other sponsors, WXPR and Trout Lake Station and Kemp Natural Resources Station, the Minocqua Public Library, the Wisconsin Alumni Association, and who am I leaving out? The Brittingham Foundation. So thanks again to all of those folks. Remember, our next Science on Tap is January 2nd with Tom Robick, professor from University of Minnesota Duluth, talking about fish in Lake Superior. And please sign up for email reminders on the clipboard near the door. And Katie also has a clipboard there for you to sign up for the email she sends out every morning at 9. And thanks for coming and have a great holiday. And we'll see you right after the new year.